So we made it. Today, Candy, my Smart ForTwo, is 25 years old. This video is my tribute to this car, a significant piece of my personal history. I fell in love at the NEC Motor Show in 1999, having seen a tiny new car hanging from an overhead gantry. What is impressive about its appearance at the show was that it wasn't an official presence. The Smart brand didn't come to the UK at first, as the car was only available in left-hand drive, and Smart was also finding their way in Europe to begin with. Therefore, it was an importer who had set up the display of cars at the show and provided brochures. A brochure I pored over incessantly after I was home, repeatedly returning to read everything it contained. There was something about the car that caught my attention. It certainly had curb appeal. That layout of a wheel in each corner made the car very cute, at least to my eye. And the appeal of a small, efficient car was something I wouldn't be able to forget. To me, it seemed innovative and fresh that it didn't try to do everything for everyone. It wasn't a jack of all trades, master of none. Here was a car, and it is classified as a car, not a quadricycle, remember, that catered well for two people, rather than compromising on space for the front seat occupants in order to seat four. And that classification as car is a part of the story. There had been smaller quadricycles before, but there were also horror stories of how badly they performed in accidents, as quadricycles are not put through the same rigorous safety testing as cars. However, I was a bit nervous. After all, there was no dealer network to support Smart in case of any problems. I would be buying from one of a couple of small importers, and the car would have to go back overseas to have warranty work done. Furthermore, it had what seemed like a very complex gearbox, which I worried might be unreliable, so I would continue to have reservations. In the end though, I decided I needed to find out more, and headed to Basingstoke to visit the left-hand drive place, a specialist second-hand car dealer who traded left-hand drive cars from Europe. They had several Smart models of varying trims and two generations to look at. Late in its development cycle, the Smart had failed the elk test and undergone some rapid modifications. That's the reason for the flared rear wheel arches covering the widened rear track, incorporated to make the car more stable. At the same time, they thinned the glass in the roof and lowered the driving position by a few centimetres to lower the centre of gravity, as well as giving it stiffer suspension to keep it more level, and a traction control system to make it more capable of staying out of trouble in extreme situations. In the early years, the car got a number of small tweaks and improvements quite quickly, and the stiffened suspension would prove to be one of the first changes they would make in the next variant, softening it off again a little bit so that it did not ride quite so harshly. The Mark II would also have seat pads, which were a retrofit to the centre of the seats over the mesh on the originals, but which could be added to the Mark I. The left-hand drive place had this, a Mark I, as well as a couple of Mark IIs, which were a little more expensive. I was not sure about the car. That trick gearbox was a concern, and could I get on with such a small car? But I was just too tempted. I had to find out, so soon enough Candy would be mine. At first I held on to my Rover 200 as well, playing it safe in case I didn't like the Smart, but the Rover would rarely get used. Using the Smart for my daily commute in traffic proved much easier than the Rover, with its manual gearbox and heavy clutch, and so the Rover would eventually go. What I really enjoyed about the Smart was that it was a combination of both efficient and fun. The small turbocharged engine made it a bit of a hoot to drive, despite the huge turbo lag. I knew that cars like the Honda Insight would be more efficient still, but probably not nearly as much fun to be in. Its form factor also made it a very practical town and city runabout. The solid colour, moulded plastic body panels were going to survive minor bumps and scrapes without needing repainting, yet the tritium safety cell, made of high-strength steel, meant it was still tough. The two-pedal driving was easy, yet retained the engine braking I enjoyed in a manual car, but which was not present on automatics at that time. And of course a car this small was wonderfully easy to park. You could nip in and out of traffic, squeezing through gaps that other cars couldn't make. The fold-down boot is great for sitting on to change your shoes for walking, and the folding front seat means she can carry more than you might imagine. That makes her a surprisingly capable load carrier. It's always fun to watch people's faces as you pull out a 6-foot stepladder from a Smart, or transport a large, heavy, widescreen 28-inch CRT TV without any drama. I was a pretty early adopter. These were not common at that time, especially as there was no official dealer network. So I would regularly get back to the car in a car park to find a gathering of people around it, keen to ask what it was and if it was electric. And on the road it made everyone smile. It's a happy little car, not aggressive, and I really liked that, and enjoyed the happiness it seemed to bring other people, especially children, who always look wide-eyed at it. It's certainly not a car that anyone could say is lacking character. I've always thought of it like a little puppy. It seems very playful and eager, with that superb little 3-cylinder turbocharged twin-spark 599cc Suprex engine. It seems to have a very unusual torque curve, as it's got a lot of low-down grunt and quite a low red line, but I really like the way it delivers the power. The gearbox is a little slow and also a little poorly tuned in this early car. We would see small tweaks to the gearbox tuning in later variants, which made it much less snatchy, particularly when needing to go down into first, for example at a roundabout. The suspension would also get a fairly major upgrade after a couple of years, switching from the simple transverse leaf spring front suspension on this car to McPherson strut. That dialed out a lot of the understeer, although it was intentionally to retain that characteristic. After all, in a car this short, the back of the car stepping out just a little bit would result in a lot of rotation to recover. People are not used to inputting a lot of steering angle to recover a skid, so it was much safer that it continue to understeer. And the limited space for the suspension and high-sided nature wouldn't help either. That high-sided design worked for a lot of people, making it a car that is easy to get in and out of for anyone with limited mobility. And that gave it quite a diverse appeal. The Smart was pretty cheap to buy and to run, so it was popular with young people as an early car, and one that they could customise a little to make it uniquely their own. But there were also retired couples who didn't need a large car and who found it easy to live with because of being easy to get in and out of. It puts less pressure on your joints as you do so, because of it sitting a bit higher than a hatchback. I would find out about the diversity of ownership through membership of the Smart Club, a gathering of like-minded people who would meet to talk about their experiences and get help and advice from other members, particularly in those early adopter years when there was no UK dealer presence. The club would also come to organise large events, including annual factory tours of Smartville in Hambach, as well as London to Brighton, which would grow to become an enormous event with thousands of attendees at its peak, once Smart was an official UK brand. The UK dealer presence would actually come quite quickly. It wasn't all that long before the initial 5 Smart dealerships would open in the UK, and the car be available directly from Smart, albeit still in left-hand drive format. The 2-seater Smart, now renamed from City-Coupe to ForTwo, would continue its rapid evolution, with lots of small tweaks and usability improvements, making it a slightly better car on each iteration. And so the promise I made myself when I bought Candy would come to fruition. I had decided when choosing which model to buy to go for the cheapest the dealer had, since it had felt like a risky purchase. I had told myself that I would risk the least money possible in that first foray and upgrade to a better equipped model later on, if I liked it. And I did like it. I was very happy with owning a Smart and with being a member of the Smart community. But I did want a few of those newer features. This car, you see, was a very early one. This has a chassis number in the low 10,000s, and the build date is in October 1998. So there are a lot of little peculiarities in this car that I could overcome by upgrading. This, for example, doesn't have a wash wipe mode, in the sense that the wipers have to be activated manually when washing the screen, and there is no countdown of remaining fuel once reaching 5 litres, as in the later cars. It doesn't have the internal boot release button that was added beneath the dashboard, and it still had that transverse leaf spring suspension, from which the switch to McPherson strut was a significant improvement. When the right-hand cars became available, I found them to be uncomfortable. That adaptation was awkward, as the pedal layout didn't suit the position of the wheel arches in the right-hand drive cars. When a glut of left-hand drive pre-registrations started to be sold off via Mercedes-Benz Direct in order to make way for right-hand drive stock, I would find myself buying one of those left-hand drive pre-registrations, getting a True Blue Metallic Passion to replace Candy. But Candy would remain in the family, with my mum taking loving and proud ownership. Indeed, it was her who named the car, saying the slightly pink tinge of the mad red colour reminded her of Candy Floss. I was very happy with YARP, the True Blue Metallic Smart, and kept it for 10 years, until a service at a friend's garage resulted in it being significantly overfilled with oil. After that, it started to use oil in a way it never had before, and I felt I couldn't trust it as I had to that point. With a change of job in mind, I would upgrade to a 451, the new model of ForTwo that had been released back in 2007. However, that proved to be a mistake, as I never managed to get comfortable in it, no matter what I tried, and eventually I decided it had to go. I remember the day I sold the 451, and how upset I was to no longer be a Smart owner. In the time I had owned Smarts, I had come to identify as a driver of the small, efficient two-seaters. It had become a part of me. I would go on to buy an Audi A3 diesel, but sadly, despite spending a lot of time choosing it, sitting in A3s at dealerships for hours on end, that would also prove to be too uncomfortable to drive after a few weeks. So what was I to do? I couldn't find anything else I could get comfortable in, and left-hand drive 450s like this were almost impossible to come by that point. It left me with an A3 I could hardly drive, and no replacement on the horizon. About a year later, after 12 years of ownership, my mum decided that it was time for her to give up driving. She found it too stressful to be responsible for a car, and a fairly old car at that, and so she gave me Candy back again. Candy being old was a concern, so I'd end up buying a second 4.2 from eBay, a silver cabrio. That helped with a strange commute I had at the time, but it also gave me options. I retained the ability to keep driving if Candy ever became too difficult to keep running. That would prove fortuitous, as we did have a fairly major pair of breakdowns. The first was a big failure of the cooling system, after a trip where she was very heavily loaded. She didn't let me down though. She got me home with no sign of problems at all, only to blow a gasket sat on the driveway once the engine was off late at night. So I was surprised when I came down to an expensive looking puddle the following day. She would disappear on the back of a flatbed, with me not knowing quite what would happen. The car would be away over a fortnight, but eventually I'd get her back. She was repairable, albeit it would turn out for about as much as she was worth. While she was gone, I still had the silver cabrio. That was a nicer car to drive, as it had a slightly larger 699cc engine developed for the Roadster, and it felt a lot more mature and refined a car. Ironically, the cabrio broke down just a few days after Candy, leaving me at the side of a very busy motorway. Fortunately, a simple top dead centre sensor replacement fettled that and got me going again after a worrying few days. Candy would fail again almost as soon as I got her back. Next time I tried to use her, her brakes were seized. It turned out she had a warped rear brake drum. It seems likely, looking back, that the brakes had been rubbing when she was so heavily loaded, and that was the root cause of the original failure. There have been some other hiccups along the way. Candy has suffered a few MOT failures for emissions, which is a horrible sort of failure, as it's not clear what's wrong. But we got those resolved each time. And here we are, as she reaches her 25th birthday. It seemed unlikely when I first bought her that I would have her for so long, but she's been a good companion. And yet today is also tinged with a little sadness, as I know our time together is coming to an end. I bought the Smart because it was fuel efficient and helped me reduce my carbon footprint at a time when that phrase didn't even exist. But there is a limit to how efficient an ICE car can be. And now I have the Zoe, which as an EV is much more efficient than the Smart. The Smart has averaged 53.5 miles per gallon since I had her back from Mum, but the Zoe does better than that. Over the last year, according to the onboard computer on the Zoe, the average efficiency has been 4 miles per kilowatt hour. Wikipedia says that a litre of petrol contains 9.5 kilowatt hours, so we can crunch some numbers to work out the MPG equivalent for the Zoe, which turns out to be 172 miles per gallon. 172 miles per gallon equivalent. Oh, Candy, you're good for a petrol car of your age, but in comparison to an EV, you're not even close. Not even compared to a somewhat bigger car. Remember that those figures represent a tank-to-wheel figure for each car, and what that figure can hide is just how much energy is lost in the process of extraction, transportation and refinement of fossil fuels. It's hard to get a good figure, as the fossil fuel industry are fairly tight-lipped about it, but the estimate is that 65 to 75% of primary energy in oil is lost in conversion to electrical or mechanical energy along the way. Those losses equally affect both cars if they are both run solely off fossil fuels, more or less, as actually we don't refine quite as much or transport quite as far to power an oil-fired power station. But the difference is that we can run an EV directly off renewable electricity. I'm sure that there will be people shouting synthetic fuels at the screen, which is a promise of making petrol using renewable energy. But unfortunately, the inefficiency of the processes involved will make it very expensive and rare. To be fair, there was an electric version of the Smart ForTwo, but it would not be an easy car to live with. It has a very limited range of about 85 miles in the peak of summer, reducing to more like 60 miles in the winter, and no DC rapid charging. Never say never, but it seems unlikely I will get another ForTwo. The seats and driving position in more modern cars do not suit me, and the electric version has not kept pace with the change in battery technologies which other cars have exhibited. The Zoe, for example, got 2 major battery upgrades in its life, but as far as I can see, the electric ForTwo didn't get any. This is, perhaps, the reason that they stopped making the ForTwo just a month or so ago, and unfortunately it's not looking likely that it will get replaced. Making money on small cars is hard, so might this be the end of the road for the 2-seater city car from Smart? So, ladies and gentlemen, I present you the Smart ForTwo, my 25-year love affair. A daring and bold product which catered well for a subset of people who realised their car didn't need 4 seats, but which is ultimately being replaced by a better technology, the modern long-range electric vehicle. Happy birthday, old friend.